Hi, everyone, and welcome to another Cloud Takeaway session of this month. We have some very interesting session for you today, and also a very interesting announcement as well that we have for the upcoming week for our Dutch Cloud Meetup. So if we look at basically who we are, what we do. So I myself, I'm Mike van der Graag. I'm a Microsoft MVP and a CTO at a company called 350 in Rotterdam, Hendrik de Gambacht for most people who know that in the Netherlands. We host Dutch Cloud Meetup sessions, especially the Cloud Takeaways as well, but we also do in-person sessions. And I have some more information about that later on after the session of today. We would not be able to be here without our sponsors, of course, so I want to give them a spot as well here. We have Betterbit, SPS Continuïteit, Intermax, 350, and EBS software from Brink. Saying it again, we would not be here without those sponsors, so we're very glad that they are with us as well in moving this and driving this effort we do to share knowledge with the community from different sides. For your information, we're streaming it live at this moment from LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. If you have questions during the session, be sure to ask them within LinkedIn or within YouTube or directly on Twitter. We will make sure that we answer your questions after the end of the session, so you will get your answers. That basically brings me to my last slide for now. I will have some more announcements after the session, and I will bring in our speakers of today. Let's bring in Michiel, and let's bring in Tuan as well, so that we are complete at this moment. Guys, the floor is yours.
Yes.
Thank
Welcome,
you,
everybody.
Mike.
And thank you, Mike, for having us. So let's start off with our session, 4 Pillars of Economic Cloud Design, which is labeled Design for Costs. And now let's start.
Let's start with the agenda. Of course, you can expect that we have an introduction ready, the why of the session, the 4 pillars itself, and the tips and tricks and Q&A will be around 30 minutes from now, I assume. So probably we will finish within 45 minutes. Having said that, we are always late in our presentation, so never mind for the schedule. Let me introduce myself. I'm Geo Hamers. I'm Solution Lead Microsoft Azure Cloud and a Codesmith at Ordina, living in Netherlands in Os. This session I presented also together with Tuan in India, Chennai last year. And besides working, I really like sometimes when it's sunny, also for a small run of 5 kilometers in 30 minutes. So not that sporty, but yeah, hey, we do something. Tuan.
Yeah. So my name is Tuan Coates. I'm also solution lead at Ordina. I'm lead performance engineer, Codesmith. Live also in the Netherlands in Almere. When it's sunny outside, I go not for a run, but I go for a ride on my motorcycle. I've been working in the IT for like almost 10 years now. And as Michiel said, we already did this presentation in India, so we're glad to bring it also online for people to join. Fun thing to know, Michiel will be flying out to San Francisco in 2 weeks to give this presentation at Developer Week, but it would also be available online the next week after that. So if you are interested in hearing this again or have any questions we pop up later, you can join us there. So let's start off with the presentation. I will give the floor to Michiel.
Yeah, and let's start with the disclaimer, because all the prices mentioned in this presentation are subject to change, and that's normal. Microsoft is continuously improving their services and continuously changing the presentation, the prices of all services. And yeah, we are giving some real life examples from our Ordina's Azure environment. Normally we show that live in a demo and then ask everyone to to keep the cameras down, because that's not possible at this moment. We cannot share all the insights, but yeah, we definitely will highlight some insights and share that with you, and how you can gain benefit from that. Why did we make this presentation? Tom, can you leverage a bit about that?
Yeah, so with the rise of cloud isn't new anymore. It's around for many years now, but we see more and more customers switching to cloud finally, and they come to the realization that it isn't cheap and it isn't always fast, and especially the first item I mentioned, it isn't cheap. If you do direct comparisons between like a lift and shift, you're going to end up paying more in the cloud. That's why, because you need to leverage the cloud capabilities, and we see a lot of customers don't do that. And they end up with massive Azure bills. We have an example further down the presentation, so I won't spoil that. But yeah, you can save a few euros, dollars, rupees here and there, and even on a large scale, like some customers Rodina has, they pay so many a month, so even 5%
Yeah.
is a lot, and we will show you how you can do that even after this session.
Yep, and let's state also that we have structured this session a bit in 4 pillars, and you can see on the bottom left part where we are in the presentation, so you can also see how long you have to still listen to this presentation, and then give you a bit of insights what you need to remember of this presentation. And of course, we can check if we have some goodie for someone who has, after a week, still all those 4 pillars in mind, and reach out to me for that. The first pillar is Geo Efficiency. And yeah, I almost hear some people already say, Geo what? Yeah, indeed. Geo Efficiency is the art of getting the same amount of compute power at a different region for a lower price. So you get more power at a lower price. And that seems to be unlogical and seems to be not feasible, but it can be done. For example, there are different data center pricing between each region. So if we create a comparison of one virtual machine, like this one stated over here, if you have that same virtual machine in Switzerland West, you have a huge price. While if you compare that with West Europe, you have really lower pricing. And also, I can imagine that some people say, yeah, we are a Dutch company and we have obligations, compliance regulations, where we need to store data in West Europe or in North Europe, in general in Europe, or maybe different regions, different need for a special data center that needs to be hosted because it's compliant, regulatory government stuff. Yep, that can be the case. Still, sometimes it's an easy switch between West Europe and North Europe, because often those changes can be made. And yeah, over here you can see already some difference if you just choose North Europe for this example. And I can almost say barely in average, all services in North Europe seems to be in general, on average, lower from pricing perspective than West Europe, while the VM, the power that you get is the same.
So these are the prices you pay each month for this virtual machine. We took out the operating system out of the equation because Windows Azure always tax you for the license. So we use an open source, and you see, as Michiel has already said, a huge difference. Like Brazil, it's almost 1,500 euros a month compared to North Europe. It's nearly the half of the price for the same compute power.
So yeah, you can just choose that, and that doesn't seems to be a big amount. Let's say €100 for a server, but think of it in scale. One of Ordina's customers is running an Azure environment with a bill of $4 million each month. If you can make a difference from 10% or 1%, it's really a huge amount when you compare it in a year.
Yeah.
So
it's let's say for ChatGPT as an example, it's blowing up. It's constantly out of service because the whole world is going to the website. For them to select the right data center could save them so many euros or dollars. I don't know how they pay, but it's all about scale, and cloud is about scaling. So saving a few percent, it's huge.
And the tips that we will provide you during the session can be also downloaded later. We will provide a link and a QR code at the end of the presentation to download this one. And one of the things to keep in mind is what are the really factors why a region is the right region for you, and what you should take into account. As Microsoft already stated on their own website, compliance and data residency, serviceability and pricing, that those three things you need to keep in mind when you select your data center. So compliance and data residency is more or less a given. You need to check. However, for some developer environments, maybe it is acceptable to go out of the Europe environment or go to the North Europe instead of the West Europe, or maybe a low price data center. So you can check that, especially when you have a clean non-production environment without any production data, then you can more easy than the production data move it to another data center. One other things that need to keep in mind is the serviceability, so you need to check if your services that you want to consume is available in that data center. And when you download this presentation, the link is also clickable. You can explore the product by region, vary the link to check all the services that are available within each data center. And therefore, you know that one service is available, one service is not available, and you can choose the right region for you. And same count for pricing itself, because pricing is not the only part that is in your decision-making process, I hope. But still, let's compare that a bit further. Tom, did you want to say something?
Huh? Oh, well, yeah. So Michiel already said we took the screenshot from Microsoft site themselves. So they're already saying, how do you choose your region? It's based on data, compliance, availability of the services, and pricing. So it's not something new. Microsoft is saying that themselves. So let's start comparing what's the impact of switching regions.
So if we have West Europe for this amount of money, and we have North or Europe with this amount of money, if you compare that, that's about 8% of difference. There is more that you can save in this comparison. You can also apply reservations, and then maybe we need to step a bit back what a reservation is. Azure reservations are, let's say, prepaid amount of money that you say, okay, I want to at least spend this amount of money to Azure, to Microsoft, to this environment, to this subscription. I want, and okay, I have a reservation, and therefore I get from Microsoft discount. So if you also say, I will put in a reservation, you can say that's a 1 year or a 3-year reservation of a Azure service. So therefore you can get discount. 3 years is really, from technical point of view, it's really far in the future. So that's I don't want to say that's the right thing to do. Normally, 1 year can be overseen, because if you deploy an application in production, it probably stay at least 1 year. So just taking that 1 year into account, then it will be 41% discount, because then we'll exactly the same virtual machine with 1 year reservation just end up with 450 euros. That's a total of potential save of 45% of one service. And if you extrapolate that to scale, then you can save a lot. And of course, a virtual machine is an expensive part in the Azure environment, but still, if you can see that in the total picture, it can be really a lot.
Yeah. So, and a good thing to know about reservations, you don't need to pay up front. You can say to Azure, say, well, I want to do a reservation for a year for these services, and still pay each month the discounted price. But we come that later in the presentation. We'll talk a little bit more about reservation and cost saving plan.
Yes, and yeah, one other thing. When I spoke with a couple of developers and administrators about choosing a different data center, was latency impact. So we did some testing with the latency and how latency differs in different data centers. And yeah, as we already mentioned, we also presented this in India. We tested this in India, but let's first of all say my colleague Twan, who is also in the session, first thing, okay, we need to have some performance tweaks right away from the beginning.
Yeah, so yeah, we deployed a P1 V2 in app services and straight away switched it to HTTP 2.0, disabled the affinity cookies. And because Michiel is our .NET guy, we run in .NET Core on Windows. So that's the demo application we used to do a performance test. First of all, let's see the latency impact. Again, this is an example in a different part of the world. So we did a ping from we had fiber internet in India, so we did a ping from the hotel to central India. We did it 100 times, and these are the results. As you see, we had an average of like bare minimum latency of 2 milliseconds and max of 4 milliseconds. Then we did the same command, same ping command, but we did it to the South India data center. And you see there the difference. It's 29 milliseconds, minimum of 28, and a maximum of 34. So you see, it seems to be a big hit on latency, but it's in milliseconds. I believe blinking is 20. How many? It's faster than blinking. So still, it appears to be a lot of impact switching data centers in this particular example, but from a performance standpoint, this is still really acceptable. 29 milliseconds from a client to the data center, it's fine. You can imagine that your customers, your visitors of your website aren't bound by region, so they end up with latency anyway. Especially as let's say for the United States, you can have people from Los Angeles all the way to New York. So having a bit of latency is normal. Again, this is the impact if you switch data centers.
Yeah, and yeah, you are of course really performance specialist. So we did also the G meter test.
Yeah. So we did a performance test to check how an end user would be impacted by a switch in data centers. So we had the sample website, and we did a get from all the resources needed to get the homepage. We did it 1,000 times. We had 1,000 iterations, and these are the results. To the South India, it's 430 milliseconds, and to Central is 550. Yeah, there is a performance impact, as you can see, about 100 milliseconds. You also deliver back a little bit of performance in terms of transactions per second, but it's still super acceptable. Having a website which responds below 1 second. It's really fast. And in this particular example, we saved, I believe, 40% of a monthly cost by only giving back 100 milliseconds of latency. But again, it's the trade-off. Do you want to give back a little bit of performance and save a lot of money, or do you have a mission critical application who needs those 100 milliseconds? Then you should stay on the data center which is closest to you, but you pay a premium price.
Yeah, and that leads us to the what's the impact part of the Geo Efficiency pillar, because the things that you need to keep in mind when you're switching over from, in this case, South to Central India, but it's really a general idea of switching from one data center to another. It's the latency to the data center, the availability of services. The key vault entries are also not easily to be transferred. So it's not possible, but it's not easy possible. Public IP addresses are bound to a data center. So when you switch them to a different region, then you cannot move or migrate the public IP addresses. And also the webhook triggers are URL based, but URL based on the where the name of the data center is in the webhook trigger URL itself. Therefore, you cannot move that webhook trigger URL itself to another data center because it's stated within the data center. So you need to keep in mind that you have to be aware of those disadvantages. However, you can get your ACU. And Tuan, can you explain a bit about the ACU?
Yeah. So further down the presentation, I'll give a more explanation. But ACU is a metric from Microsoft on how much horsepower a compute service has. So an ACU of 100 across the board is the same, and that's a way to make it easier for users to see how much power do I buy from Azure, because deriving that from CPU cores, memory, speeds, that's really tricky and not so doable. You can do it, but therefore they come up with ACUs. And we showed a little bit of an example further down the line.
Yep. And also for Bicep and ARM templates, they can be just moved over. But in general, there is a special thing about Bicep and ARM templates. And in general, downloading them from the internet or reusing Bicep and ARM templates, sometimes, or pretty often, the data center is already mentioned in the configuration files of those templates. So if you just download an ARM template or reuse the ARM template or Bicep, and you want to deploy it to a different environment, you need to fill out or check that all those data center lines are really pointing to the correct one. Otherwise, you are still using fully or partly the old data center or the data center where you want to move away from. So keep that in mind. Settings also, tags are can be moved over from one data center to another, general tags. However, if you're using tags also to state what kind of impact it is, or where you labeled a tag that it is an Azure service is hosted in that or that data center, that's text. That text part as a key value pair is not transformed automatically. You need to change that if the tag content needs to be changed, and that same count for policies. Policies are moving along, but if you arrange your Azure data center with policies and you're moving that way, you need to check that. But it's more or less automatically moved to one data center to another if you are going to switch that, but keep in mind that you need at least to check that. So we have more or less a few steps. Choose the region based on what is allowed on your compliance or government rules. And of course, you need to check your support, your service requirements need to be met, your network performance needs to be met, and of course the economical region fitting. However, that part will be added later. Yes. Sorry, Twan.
No, so if you think back of the beginning of this section, of this pillar, we showed you the 3 main topics. Azure says how you can choose a region. We added one, that's the performance needs, because it's you need to have a good understanding what's the impact of switching data centers, not solely looking at price, because switching from let's say Asia to Europe is a huge impact, but if you can manage that, you probably can save a few euros here and there. So that's the step we added to Microsoft's own approach on selecting a region. So step 3 is a key one for us.
Yep. And then we move over to dev and test, because everyone has a dev and test environment. At least I hope so. In general, it's maybe an open door, but just choose the cheapest option. That's simple. The cheapest option, because dev and test environment, cheapest option, that can be the cheapest data center. Of course, that can also be if you have a fully automatically deployment on your nearest by data center, and it will only spin up and spin down when you are really using it. That's also fine, but just choose the cheapest option.
Yep.
Especially if you don't have any production data in your test environment and do that. So just cheapest option.
Yeah. Of course, as a performance engineer, for me, if you're running a performance test, do it on the production region. So keep that in mind. But for your functional tests, please use just the cheapest option, because there's no need for the nearest latency region.
Yeah, and that brings us to our second pillar, because if we know the region, we still have sizing that is really important, because as already stated on the slide, one size does not fit all. Let's bring us back a few basic terms of Azure. I hope everyone knows these already. Free, shared, basic, and standard, where they are on a sequence. Free is the cheapest one, and standard is the most expensive one. Tiers like basic are obsolete, at least that mentioned Microsoft on the side, and should not be used anymore. So it should be free, shared, or standard. However, if you just choose free, shared, standard without checking what's in it, then it's really difficult. So let's dive a bit into what is in VMs, as that is a really expensive option using in Azure. Let's dive a bit in the sizing part of virtual machines. And then we come back to the ACU later on. You have general purpose machines that are more or less good to go for a lot of functionality, and that is for a lot of functionality, that's good enough. If you need a higher memory ratio, higher CPU to memory ratio, then you can have a compute optimized. The other way around, when you have a high memory to CPU ratio for large caches and that kind of things, SQL things, then you have one at the E series. You have storage optimized with an L series. That's even more for SQL and big data. GPU series, very handy together with the high performance compute when you want to mine Bitcoin, but keep in mind that's not allowed in the Azure environment, and is of course also the most expensive one. Yeah. If you want to,
there is you can even purchase bare metal if you want to. I believe it's still there. So if you really want the horsepower, you can still get a whole rack and go nuts. But again, you're paying a lot of euro each month. So these are the general sections we have in terms of VM.
Yep, and then if you have the bare metal, that is mostly used for SAP, for HANA, that kind of solutions, and then you even pay a monthly fee even while you bought the bare metal yourself. Then you even need to have you have the cost of monthly to make it an Azure bare metal server. When you compute units, you can for easily see that that when you compare one server in one SKU family to another, or from one data center to another data center, the ACU is at every data center the same from a perspective. So if you have a virtual machine in the North Europe region with the ACU of 100, and that's when you check it really physical, it's an HP server, for example, and in the other data center, it's a Fujitsu Siemens server, whatsoever, a Dell. Then when it's also stated the ACU 100, then it's from Microsoft perspective, it's the same. It's the results of the workload still may vary a bit, but it's you can compare you can really compare that with almost the same performance.
Yeah.
Having said that, you already see some in the naming. So let's check a bit about the family naming itself. You can have a family, the amount of CPUs, the actual virtual CPUs, if it's memory incentive, yeah. I know that you don't have to remember all this every time, but definitely look this up so that you are choosing the right one and you are not over ordering or ordering more than you really need for your solution. And then we have maybe the most important one, generation switching. Sometimes Microsoft just says, okay, we have a standard D2, and after a year we have a version 2, and after another year we have version 3, and after another year we have version 5. Microsoft will not upgrade or switch your virtual machine to a new version. You have to do that yourself.
Yeah. So,
and yeah.
Yeah, so you can see that there's different variations of the same family, the same virtual machine. So it's a D2, but you have multiple versions. And Michiel now is going to show you something really interesting in the terms of performance you get.
Yeah, because more a new version, you get more memory, and this the same CPU without with less cost. And if you see that in the Azure Advisor, Microsoft even gives you an advice on how to see that and how to make benefit from it. If you go to the Azure Advisor and you see this kind of figures, I would definitely recommend to look into it, because as you can see over here in this subscription, you can potentially yearly save $50,000 US without with a lot of simple steps, and also yeah, and I have that also in a screenshot for over here.
Yeah.
The lowest one of this table, you can see if you, and I will point it out here, resize the D3 version 2 to an F1, based on the analysis, it will just give you a benefit of almost 30% of your costs.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is something within Azure. It's free within each subscription, and it's a feature you can just click on, and you get advisories. And you can also see the recommendation rule, which is being used by Azure. So in this case, he says, well, you see a CPU utilization of less than 5% of average, which is a hugely underutilized machine. You can see additional details on the metrics which are being used for that rule, when it was last updated. You can also update it yourself to get the latest information. And based on that, he says, well, the advisor says, well, you have this machine which is being underutilized. Maybe you want to scale it down, or potentially even shut it down if it's not being used. And it will also say, well, you have this machine already for a year. Maybe you should do a reservation for it, because you didn't change anything about the configuration. And this is all out of the box. Usually we do this in a demo, but again, we have some customer information in that, so we can't show you, so that we use the screenshots. But this is in every Azure portal already.
Yep. And if you think everyone is the same, has the same prices, that's not the case. Sizing and prices are may differ for each customer. So the listed prices are there, and they are out there at the internet. Everyone can find them, but you can also have personal prices and even personal discounts. So if you have a version 2 virtual machine, for example, while all the rest of the data center in your region is already at version 5, Microsoft will offer you personally via that advisory system a lower price, so that you're also going to switch to the new generation. So keep that in mind, because then you get maybe lower prices. So it's not always the same list prices for everyone. It's really personal prices and personal discounts.
And you also can have an agreement or enterprise agreements with fixed pricing or fixed discounts. So again, pricing may differ even within. If you're sitting in the same team, if somebody logs in, it can be a different price. So keep that in mind.
Yep. And then this more simple one, sizing and scaling. In general, vertical is just replacing a server with a heavier system, or smaller. And the horizontal scaling is just going to add the same machine again and again next to the other one. It's always our tip to use horizontal scaling, so scale out, scale in, instead of scale up and scale down, because then you can also easier scale up, scale down, and it's the only disadvantage of that approach is your application needs to be ready that it can be used for horizontal scaling. But yep, it's really improves the power, and therefore also pricing wise, it's most of the time better.
And for most services within Azure, you need to shut them down or restart them if you're going to do vertical scaling. There are some exceptions, but for VMs, app services, they need to do a redeploy. So in terms of scaling, horizontals also has less impact on your users, because if you need to scale, let's say in production, and you do it on a vertical basis, chances are you need to restart the machine, and you end up with more performance issues because one of two machines is down.
And then we have in general at starter point that you need to pick the right size, and use the Azure capabilities and resize when needed. So also check if there's a need for that one. When you're going for performance testing, you need 100% in order to determine the right size. And if you have a more need for fine-grained control and scaling, then you can better use smaller instances. And that's also better for throughput for requests.
Yeah, so based on some experience we had with scaling and performance testing, having a smaller machine ends up being better for the throughput in terms of global throughput of your system, and you can scale up faster or slower depending on how big your machine is. If you need to add a huge machine, you get a huge impact on costs, but also takes a little bit more time. It isn't always available. Didn't have this in a long time, but like 2 years ago, when I want to scale up a machine, I had get the message, well, that isn't available at the moment, but they're upgrading. So keep in mind, if you have a specific big machine, it may not always be available in a data center, especially during peak times. So the smaller machines are generally better available. And then a statement for me coming controversial. In terms of cloud, having a 100% CPU is fine. I'm using everything I paid for. You can see, well, that's going to be an issue, right? Having 100% CPU memory utilization. Well, in general, yes, but you need to look at the end user perspective. So if you have 100% CPU utilization and the response times or your system is still responsive, why bother buying more compute power? You use everything you pay for. And Michiel is even working in cloud on a daily basis. And how many machines are underutilized, you would say?
Yeah, most of the time it's always underutilized, and 10 or 20%, it's sometimes it's really already a huge utilization. So, and that's then you pay 80% for nothing.
Yeah. So having underutilized machines is just wasting money doing nothing in the cloud.
Yeah, and that makes us also to that utilization target that we mentioned, or that we find a really good target. Ton and I came up with 60 till 75% of utilization should be your goal. It's always a difficult one, but yeah, that's, I think, a good goal.
So look at response time instead of utilization should be the exit strategy for your infrastructure or your sizing selections. And again, 60 to 75 utilization, you have a small overhead for any spikes during that time.
Mm-hmm. And you need to keep an eye on the monitoring because it's never-ending story. It's a loop. It's something that you need to keep monitoring and look back and check if you need to scale or switch generation hardware. You need to be continuously improving that monitoring part. So that brings us to the end of the second pillar. Let's move on to the third pillar. It's zero user costs. So let's explain a bit about that. Zero user cost, the amount of cost associated with running your cloud environment without any user-based activity. So like an empty store, which is open, which has all the lights on, the heating on, the cash, the cashiers are there, everything is available. However, no customers yet. That amount, that is really important. Can you tell me a bit why it's so important, Swan?
Yeah, so zero user cost is your that's something you need to pay each month without any revenue, without any users. And the higher the amount, the more you are losing on each transaction or each user. So having insights in zero user cost helps you also determine your capabilities in terms of cloud native architecture. So we have an example on zero user costs and how does that look. You can see two graphs. Is to say it's similar data. The one is a bar graph and then there's a line graph, and what you see is like a linear line of increasing costs each day on the left. This indicates that there isn't any difference day to day on the amount you're paying for this environment. So your zero user costs are fixed. If there are 5 users, 10 users, it's a weekday, it's a weekend day, it's during the night. Same on the right, each day you have the same costs. Even a more detailed graph after this, you can see even every day you pay the same. And that's, you maybe think, yeah, that's good, right? We know what we're paying for, but you're not scaling up and down. So you're paying, if it's busy, you're paying the same amount, or it's really quiet on your environment, you're also still paying the same amount of money. And that's strange because cloud enables you to switch that over. So paying as you go, or paying for what you use. So this is a good graph based on zero user cost. What you see is a really low bottom line and daily cost, and then we had a release in this instance, and you can see the blue line spiking up with some traffic, with some deployments, and then afterwards it goes down to the level. And the next example, even better, we have a small line again, and deploy a new feature which is being used, and you see movement in the cost line based on the usage of your system, and that's something you probably need to achieve. And we go in the next slide, and Michiel is going to say why that is handy to have visibility in zero user cost.
Yeah, that's handy because the visibility, you also have the cloud native development adoption, and it helps you in giving having a baseline helps you in tracking improvement or a decline of that. But in general, it gives you insight and a correct feeling about where you should look at and how you can optimize that. If you know your zero user cost, then you also know the difference between when there's zero users and there are a lot of users of your application. And yeah, you need to apply those patterns. At least that was I was thinking. But then we came to the statement when Twan and I discussed it. Yeah, describe a problem. But Twan mentioned he's not really from the patterns. He's more from the, what was it?
Anti-patterns. So patterns are fine, but I'm more of a destructive guy. I'm a tester by nature. So what's anti-patterns? Things you shouldn't do because they will deliver bad code, bad designs, or bad architecture. So there are three main topics. You got the golden hammer. You copy and paste programming, and you Swiss knife object, or Swiss knife in general. Let's go to the first one, golden hammer. What we see a lot is, a solution to a problem, and you say, well, I got this sort of same solution. Let's apply that big hammer as a solution, and boom, fix the problem. But what you end up with is what I see a lot is, oh, we have a performance issue. Let's upgrade the hardware beneath that. So add more CPUs, add more memory, and poof, issue is gone. But you end up with a huge Azure bill. So that's something you need to think of. Every problem is unique, and you should approach that in a unique way, and don't start banging with a big hammer on the solution because that helps in the past.
And that's for the golden hammer part. But now more like the copy and paste programming, because I'm really loving copy and paste programming. But still, copying biceps or templates is all fine when you want to speed up the deployments. But still, and be aware that you need to check the content of all those templates, as already mentioned earlier, that you can have maybe some parameters or configurations in those templates that are pointed to the wrong data center I already mentioned, but also when you have the wrong SKU size of the version of your virtual machine. Maybe you have a download a template with a version 2 version of a server, while everyone is already on the version 5, which has way more power, and the monthly fee is way lower. So keep in mind when you use copy and paste programming that you are also watching out for all those templates, parameters, and things that are already filled in for your environments. Yeah, and the God object, or the Swiss Army knife, the heavy monolith application, then you have a higher zero user cost, of course. when you have more cloud native architecture, that's the road towards the zero user cost. You really need to check to ensure that you are not using one tool to fix all, one Swiss Army knife. How do you say that? Jack of hearts, master in one. No, how was that one? You know that?
What was it?
That's an
Jack
expression.
of all trades, master of none.
Yes, that one. Because you can almost perform everything with a Swiss Army knife, but it's not meant for everything. You need to choose the right thing. Go ahead.
So for that instance, so if you have a monolithic application, let's say a database, there are far better options than do that in a VM. Let's say you can do Cosmos DB, which is scalable. It's you have app pools. So that's more of this anti-pattern. Start decoupling your applications on the road to
optimizing for the future.
Yeah.
How to reduce those costs? Already mentioned a bit. Use the reserve pricing or savings plan. Savings plan a little bit more later on that one. Use dev test plans for development and testing environments. Scaling for production. Especially a special thing about bring your own license. If you have already some licensing on your on-premises environment, also check if you can exchange that with bring your own licensing functionality of Azure, so you get those licensing costs of Azure back or lowering your monthly fee. And of course, performance tests on a regular basis and check your daily run utilization. Then we come back to the fourth pillar. The fourth pillar is the cost tool set. That's about improve, repeat, reuse. And let's check what we can already have in that tool set. In general, we have in Azure storage with hot data, warm data, and cold data. And you can here already see what needs to be used for what. And in general, you can say everything needs to be hot data because I need the information and data directly. But keep in mind that if you choose hot data, then the prices are really more than the other options. So in general, look at the data, classify the data, and check what you really need. And that storage reserved capacity. Let me check if I can have that. Now, the storage reserved capacity is also giving you additional reduce of costs. So if you have a storage reservation of your storage account, then you can also reduce your pricing for each month, so that you every month get even for archive. If you say, okay, this archive will be used for 10 years on a row, then reserve that storage on archive, because then it will even be the price will even be less. So really take that into account. Reservation in general, the three options. You have no reservation, that's the default one, 1 year reservation, and the 3-year reservation. You can, if you know what you are using in the future, just make a reservation. At least try to make a reservation of all the things that you are going to foresee that you're really using for 1 year. Take that discount. It's really gives a lot of beneficial finance parts.
Yeah. So for reservations, again, Michiel mentioned 3 years it's a bit tricky. We wouldn't recommend going for 3 years for every feature that you use. But let's say you have an old school application which it's up and running, and we keep it for another 5 years. You can of course use a 3-year reservations, because that saves like 61%, I believe, on the default. But there is something new on the block which you can use, because reservations seems a bit, oh shit, I need to have a fixed service. But there's something new, and that's cool, because reservations in combination with savings plans can help you be flexible and save some money. So Michiel, tell me about the savings plans.
The saving plans. Since the starting of Microsoft Ignite, the October 2022 edition, there are saving plans, and then you can have, let's say, also a sort of prepaid thing, but per hour in an environment, and then whereby you can say, okay, I want to use this virtual machine for X amount of hours a month, and maybe in the future really reserved or during the day, especially a specific hour, but for the moment, an X amount of hours in a month. And then you have reservations, and those as your reservation plans, then you pay for the full hourly amount, even if the usage is less. It's not at additional costs, it's just you saving because you are saying, I'm going to use that amount of hours, and then you pay the full hours, but against a lower price. It's a really beneficial thing to do. It's really pretty new. It makes all what we stated before a bit more difficult to take a look at, but you can really get a lot of discount on your total price. So create that effort to ensure that you have everything, every discount that will pay you back on a later stage. So create the saving plans. If you want to do that and you cannot find it, you can just Google, but you can also check at the PowerPoint presentation later on at your own time. Then there are links to that managed savings plans part itself. And saving plan, it needs to be purchased, but still it's an hourly commitment, and it's not that difficult. You need, of course, the rights to purchase that within your Azure account, but take a look at that functionality. That having been said, and looking at the time, we are really good at time management. Design for cost, 4 pillars of economic cloud design. I'm not sure if that's possible, that the link will be also in every chat of every location. But in general, you can just QR code, scan the QR code in the center for the PowerPoint presentation, or connect to us via the QR codes, or by just searching our names on the LinkedIn, or contacting via Dutch Cloud Meetup. For now, thank you for your attention, and give the word back to Mike.
No, I don't hear Mike. But...
I don't hear Mike. I'm not sure if everyone doesn't hear Mike. I don't hear Mike. I hope.
Yeah, sorry, that's the mute button on the microphone. I've done that so many times. So, Twan, Michiel, thanks for your session. It was really interesting. We had some questions already in the comments as well from the platforms. I think one of the questions was already answered by you. So one asked the question, when do you decide moving to another region?
We mentioned it's there's an impact, as we said. There's a latency impact, but there's also some work need to be done because you need to switch over some features, maybe link some networks. But again, if you look at the scale, especially enterprise organizations may benefit like hugely from this, but also like a startup where every budget is really is low, so you can also maybe do more by just moving regions, or maybe.
And of course, if your environment is really difficult from deploying your Azure stuff, then it makes it more hour of development or administrating that. So then the costs are higher. So it's also an per person or per company different answer.
Yeah, but maybe it's a bit controversial, but let's say if it's really hard to switch regions, you're not using the cloud correctly, because it should be like in the portal, like switching over in a drop-down menu or switching in your template or your bicep template, like the region. Again, that the capabilities are there within Azure or in AWS. If you can also mention that, but. So if it's really tricky to switch, it's maybe also a good moment to like redesign your cloud environment.
Yep.
Yeah. So you have a lot of variables basically in place that make sure that you make the most out of the platform.
Yeah.
Yes.
Another question. So you made an example of basically West Europe, North Europe with a cost difference. How much in the time you have worked with it did you see that basically that cost also switch around from basically North Europe being cheaper than West Europe and the other way around?
I'm deploying my stuff all the way for 4 years in North Europe. Didn't see it being more expensive than West Europe, to be honest.
Okay.
Still the most cheapest big Europe region, unfortunately, like West Germany or of Central Germany, but we tracked the prices of Azure and they seem pretty fixed, but I'm not sure how long that's going to stay that way.
Yeah. And if you say that in average, our feeling in average, not don't pin me on it, but let's say 8% difference north cheaper in more or less.
Yeah, so it's safe to say that it's basically somewhat fixed per region.
Yeah,
so if you pick the cheapest one, it will be stayed at for at least a year. Yeah.
But again, with the savings plan, which being released like in last Ignite, I have the feeling we could face hourly rates in the future, and it makes sense if you look at the global energy crisis we have, but also the cost of chips, compute power, which is being more used and used. It's still strange we don't have we have really fixed Azure prices. So for me, I believe in maybe a year, or if you do the same question in 5 years, we have hourly rates for VMs.
Mm-hmm.
Because now it's still fixed, but I have a feeling it's going to change.
I can imagine. So that were basically the questions for today. So guys, again, thank you for doing this presentation for us.
Yeah.
And I hope to see you another day soon as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. And,
no problem. So basically, like I said before the session, we still have an announcement, and that's basically for this Tuesday. We have an in-person session at EB's Software from Brink, from Barbara Forbes and Aaron Stahl. It's an evening on infrastructure as code. So if you like to be there, it's only in person, so you have to be at that place at that time. So it will be held in Rotterdam, the Groot Handelskantoor, next to Central Station. So if you are really into it, be sure to be there as well, because it will be a very interesting session. And at the end, I also want to thanks again our sponsors, Betabit, SPS Connectiviteit, Intermax 350, and EB's again. So if you would like to speak at one of our cloud takeaways, or basically on the in-person sessions as well, you can fill out our CFP. We have a QR code here that you can scan. Otherwise, you can also look at our website, dutchcloudmeetup.online, where you can also find everything regarding this session and our future sessions as well. And you can also find our recordings there as well. So they are totally linked there. So again, thank you guys for joining. Hope to see you the next time as well. And maybe I will see you in Rotterdam this Tuesday. Bye.